Hello, hello, hello. Come on in. As you're coming in, don't be shy. Say hello. We're going to get started here in a second. I will say that I think God is so good, which is what I say every time. But I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to be one of those guys that be sitting on here with a blank face, be looking and looking and looking, waiting for people to come on. We're going to get started. I do have what I feel is a good word. Hello, Minister Barbara. How are you? And so this one here that we're teaching on tonight uh, is still fresh. God is still giving it to me. So I haven't had the time to type it up and have it on my tablet or anything. This is going to be notes straight from God. So I think it's going to be good. All right, let's pray. Lord God, we just love you. We thank you. We pray that you would talk to us, teach us tonight. Help us to learn more about you. Help us to just have a better understanding of who you are. Reveal to us and continue to reveal to us our purpose and everything else, Lord God. We just love you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. We do apologize for not being on last week, but as many of you know, we got caught in dealing with the aftermath of the tornado that hit Troutwood, Ohio, in the surrounding areas. And so we was down there with that. And also Saturday, we was up there as well on Saturday, just volunteering and helping people get cleaned up and helping churches clean up their areas and so forth. So I just ask that you continue to pray for Dayton. I pray for Troutwood and the surrounding areas because the cleanup is going to take a while, and it is the devastation is truly real. The interesting thing about that is it's amazing when you see houses that have had their complete top floor blown off, or houses that were completely gutted and just the three walls of the house are standing, and still with all of that, only one person died. And now, he, even though he was elderly, it's just a blessing that it was not massive, widespread death from that. So it's just a blessing. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? What we're going to talk about today is we're going to finish up dealing with faith. Now, y'all know from our series that we're dealing with right now, we're in a series called Broken Expectations. And that Broken Expectations series, I believe, is just just an awesome series that we're in. And if you have not had a chance to get to it or to listen to it, I just urge you to get to at least the last message, because we're talking about how when we have broken expectations, how it impacts our growth, it impacts relationships, it impacts even our ability to relate to God. And so we've dealt with topics such as when we don't meet people's expectations and how do we deal with that. We talked about when people don't meet our expectations and how do we deal with that. We've also talked about when God does not meet our expectations, and how do we navigate through the times where the God that in our imagination and that we vision God, when that God doesn't do what we think he should or even expect him to do. And then this coming week, hey, Pastor Whitfield, it is good to see you. This coming week in service, we are going to be dealing with what happens when we don't meet our own expectations. So now in our Bible studies, we're dealing with the flip side. We're really dealing with the flip side of broken expectations. And the flip side is faith. And why is that important? The reason why that's important is because faith and expectations are two wings of the same bird. And I think I explained that to you last week. Now, y'all had to look at my big old hands. Faith and expectations are two wings of the same bird. In other words, you need both faith and expectation in order to see your miracles. And that's a formula that you can use. Faith and expectation, faith plus expectation, will equals miracles. And so when we look at that, we have to understand that there has to be a faith aspect and an expectation aspect. Many times the problem is that many of us believe God for something we don't even expect him to do. We're trusting God and we're thinking that and we hope that God would do it. But the reality is we don't live as though we expect him to do it. And so one of the things that God had told me to tell you, which I told you this is fresh. I was just working on this even minutes before I came online. One of the things that God told me to tell you is that this is going to be a year of miracles for you. And this is going to be a year where you're going to see some serious miracles in your life. Now, in order to see those miracles, guess what? You have to have both faith and expectations. But let me caution you, because whenever we look at and understand miracles and the power of miracles, there's always situations where it does not look like God is going to come through. So even though this is going to be a year of the miraculous for you, that also means that you're going to be in situations to where it looks like God is not there. Situations where it looks like God may not come through. Situations where it looks like God has not heard your prayers or he's not listening to your prayers. Situations that look like you've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for God and he's not answering. So you have all of those situations to deal with. But guess what? This is a year of the miraculous for you. So even though you're in those situations, just keep expectations and just keep your faith. Why? Because God is going to move and going to come through for you. And I promise you, if you can grab hold of that, you will see the miraculous this year. So in dealing with the expectation piece, and that's because we're still in our studies on that on our series called Broken Expectations, and dealing with that expectation piece, I want to talk about the power of imagination. Why is that important? Now, keep in mind, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the fact that faith, you need faith in order to see God move, but you need expectation in order to see faith move, okay? And so we also talked about how hope and the power of hope, how hope leads to faith. So many times when we are attacked in the spiritual realm or in the spiritual sense, our faith is not even attacked. It is our hope. And when we stop hoping for stuff, guess what? Then we can't have faith. Well, the imagination is to expectation what hope is to faith, okay? And so when we understand that imagination, our power of imagination, it builds faith, but it also builds expectation. Okay, so let's dig into this and let's get into some deep stuff, I believe, and some stuff that's going to help us when we understand the power of the imagination. Okay, what happened is, let me just say this because I feel the need to say this. Whenever we ask God for something that is bigger than God himself, or whenever we ask for something that is greater than ourselves, something that only God can do, that is one of the greatest acts of worship. Let me say that again. Whenever we ask God to do something that only he can do, that is bigger than ourselves, that is one of the greatest acts of worship. Now, why is that important? That's important because that helps us to understand the imagination. Why? Because the imagination helps us to see things that only God can do, things that are so big that we can't do it ourselves. And when we put those things and begin to ask God for those things, that is one of the greatest acts of worship. What is worship? Worship is us ascribing worth to God. It's telling God how much he is worth, what his worth is to us. Now, why is that important? Because when I tell God, or when I talk to God, or when I have faith in God for something that he can do, it's showing how much I value him. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, when we understand that, it can help us to begin to build our and understand that it helps us to build our expectation. It helps us to build our faith, and then it also leads to helping us to talk about what we're going to talk about today, and that's imagination. But before I do that, I want to just pause for a second and talk about one of the biggest problems that we have in the church. And I think that this begins to frustrate people is this, is it's really the way that we teach faith. And what do I mean by that? Here's what I mean. We explain faith and we teach faith and we make it so appealing and we make it so easy and we make it so glamorous that we just make it look so easy. And then what happens is when people begin to experience frustration, they actually begin to think, well, what's wrong with me? So what we do, let me give you an example. Let me just give you an example so you can understand what I mean by that. How many of you have ever went to the jewelry store to buy jewelry? I'm not talking about Walmart and getting one of them little rings out of Walmart, but I'm talking about a legitimate jewelry store. And when you walk into a jewelry store, they have crazy lighting. And they have crazy lighting. And the reason why they have crazy lighting is that light makes everything looks good. And so you can have a ring and you look at that ring and the diamond sparkles. You look at that gold ring and it's just sparkling in it. And the reason why is maybe not so much the glitter and the glistening of the ring itself, but it is the reflection and the act of the light. So the light that we put on those rings makes those rings in some instances look better than what they really do look. Okay. Now, when we understand that, that's kind of how we are with the church. We put our faith in such an atmosphere. Well, if you have faith in God, you're going to miraculously be debt free. Well, if you have faith in God, I heard people telling me about miracle money. I do believe in miracle money, and I've gotten some miracle money. But I've had people tell me, well, if you have faith in God and you're a pastor, then all of a sudden God can write you a check in one day that cancels out all your debt. He surely can. And I believe he can. But what happens is that we do this and we talk from the pulpit and make faith so easy and so glamorous. And then people in the pews get frustrated because they don't see they don't see it the way that we are talking to it, the way we are talking about. So they begin to get frustrated. They're like, well, what's wrong with me? How come I don't have the same success as somebody else? I remember back in the day when sowing seeds was so popular, and I do sow my seeds. People was telling me, well, if you sow $100 seed, I promise you, God is going to cancel all your debts. Well, I sold a $100 seed, I sold $1,000 seed, I sold a $5,000 seed. I stopped it. I never got to the 10,000, but I did sow a $5,000 seed. I sold all of these seeds expecting, boom, my finances to go through. Now, the problem that I had with that is this. It didn't happen for me the way that they said it was. And so I began to get discouraged. I began to get frustrated. I know you thought probably thinking like, wait a minute, you a pastor and you sit up here getting frustrated and discouraged. How I thought you were supposed to have all the answers. Well, no one has all the answers. The only way you have all the answers is if you're God. And trust me, you don't want me to be God. I'm telling you, because if I was God, there'd be some people who just wouldn't be here right now. Lord have mercy. All right, let's get back to the lesson. Okay, so when we understand the power of imagination, when I talk about imagination, what I'm talking about is the power of the mind, the power that God uses of the mind. Let's give a scripture. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. Let me read that for you. It says, now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. Let me read that one more time. Now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. And so when we talk about it, think about how powerful God is. He's able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we can ask, watch this, or think. Okay. And then it says, according to the power that worketh in us. What is that power that worketh in us? And we're going to talk about a little bit what that power that worketh in us is. And really, that is the power of the imagination. Okay. Now, there's other powers that works within us, but that is one of them. Okay. Now, when we understand what imagination is, what is imagination? Imagination And some synonyms for imagination is thinking. It is visualization. It is dreaming. It is the ability to confront things. Okay. And so people ask a lot from God, but they imagine very little. Let me ask you this question. The things that you are asking God for, can you see yourself really, truly, legitimately see yourself in them? Okay. The things that you are asking and hoping for, can you legitimately see God doing those things for you? Okay. And so when we understand that God can do exceedingly above what we can ask or think, that is a powerful situation. That is a powerful thing that we have to understand. Okay. So again, imagination is to expectation what hope is to faith. Now, why is that important? Because the imagination starts with the mind. Okay. Now, the mind is a powerful, powerful thing. Okay. So everything that we have on this planet, every single thing started with someone's imagination. Let me say that again. Everything that we have on this planet started with someone's imagination. Everything that you experience started in someone's imagination, started with a thought, started in someone's mind. Okay. And now, we understand that, it helps us to understand a lot of things. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that God gave everyone the power of imagination. Okay. Now, normally we use it in a negative fashion, don't we? We imagine things. We imagine things that we don't want to happen. We imagine things. And have you ever imagined something bad and you thought about something bad long enough and then it happened? Why did it happen? Because you drew that thing to you. Well, imagination can work in the negative, but it can also work in the positive too. And the reason why is because your body does not know the difference between a thought or an imagination. And we're going to talk about that later. Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm getting a little excited. Okay. And so when we think about the imagination, we have to understand that God gave you the power in your mind to imagine. Does that make sense? Okay. Remember Genesis chapter 127, when God said that he made us how? In his own what? Image. That word image could also be translated out of imagination. Okay, so you yourself, you who you are from the imagination of God. Now, this is interesting because it shows how intricate God is. How intricate is God is that he has billions and billions of people that's ever lived, and we all are just a little bit different. Okay, we all have little nuances. No two people are exactly the same. Why? Because of the power of the imagination. Okay, so let me give you a definition of imagination. It's this: it's the act or power of forming mental images of something not present to the senses or never before wholly perceived in reality. It is the creative ability. It is the ability to comfort and deal with the problem. Let me tell you that again. It is the act or power of forming mental images of something not present to the senses or never before wholly perceived in reality. It is a creative ability. It is an ability to comfort and deal with a problem. So all of those things represent the imagination. The imagination are mental pictures. The imagination are images of things that are not yet seen. The imagination is the ability to deal with problems. The imagination is also the ability to confront things, okay, and deal with various issues, okay. All of those things are imagination. Now, imagination is not fantasy. Now, many of us deal in fantasy. What do? We fantasize certain things, and we get into this esoteric experiences where we just see, birds flying and all that stuff in fantasy land. That's not what the imagination is. The imagination is, and we're going to break some stuff down. The imagination is the ability to see something that is there that has not yet come. Does that make sense? Okay. And so expectation can grow by tapping into your imagination. Expectation. So when we imagine it first, that builds expectation. And why is that important? Because remember, expectation and faith are both needed to see miracles. And so when we allow God and we begin to use our imagination to begin to talk about things of envision or visualize what God is doing or what God is telling us, then we can begin to build some expectation. Okay, I hope this is making sense to you. Okay, so again, expectation, and now let's get into the meat of it. That was all introduction. Okay, expectation starts in the mind. Now, the mind is a powerful thing. All right, let me give you some stats about the mind. The human mind is faster than any supercomputer that is ever created. Okay, the human mind has a storage capacity greater than any computer that is in existence today. All right, the human mind, listen to this, can do 60 quadrillion things per second. Now, what is a quadrillion? Quadrillion is 16 zeros. So 60 plus 16 zeros, it can do that many things per second. That's the power of the mind that God gave you. Okay. Now, here's the thing about it is many times you don't even know that this stuff is processing that fast. Let me give you an example. Okay. Your brain, your mind controls the pumping of your blood through arteries, through every artery. At the same time as doing that, it's controlling your blinking. At the same time you're blinking, you're listening to me and processing what I'm saying. At the same time you're processing what I'm saying, you having thoughts about what I'm saying. At the same time, you also just pass gas. Why? And all of that happened. Watch this, and you didn't even know what's happening. You wasn't strained, you wasn't stressed, you wasn't overwhelmed. You didn't slow down like computers slow down when they get overworked. Why? Because God created your mind with an awesome capacity. If you remember, Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein had one of the highest IQs of everyone that's ever lived, and it is said that he only used 10% of his mind. So I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means for me. Maybe I'm like 1 or 2%. But Albert Einstein, they said, only used about 10% of his brain. Why? Because the brain, the mind, is huge. It is powerful. Okay. And so God gave us, and so when we talk about imagination, let me break it down and use a different word. He gave us an image maker. He gave us the ability to make images. Does that make sense? Okay. So he gave us an image maker, or the ability, watch this, to create pictures. Why? Because pictures control our destiny. Watch this. Pictures are crucial to setting expectation. Okay, why? Because you cannot expect what you don't see. You can't expect what you don't see. And so when we understand that, we understand that the imagination or our image maker is instrumental in building hope, is instrumental in building faith, is instrumental in building expectation. Does that make sense? Okay. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever had faith for something that you couldn't see yourself? Have you ever had faith for something you couldn't see? Have you ever had faith for a car that you didn't even know what it looked like? Have you ever had faith for an outfit that you've never seen before? Have you ever had faith for finances that I don't know what a person like that looks like? Many people say, I want to be a millionaire, but what does that look like? Okay. Have you really truly had faith and had expectation for something that you didn't have no visual concept of? Many times, if you're really honest with yourself and with me, you have to say no. Why? Because you need that image, that imagination. You need that vision of something in order to grab hold of it. Okay. So just think about Abraham. What happened with Abraham? Okay. Abraham, remember Abraham, when God told Abraham that he was going to give him the land, what did he have Abraham do? He told Abraham to walk up and down in the land. He said, I want you to see the land. I want you to see what it looks like. What was he doing? He was giving him an image of what it was he was to have faith for. He was giving him an image of what it was he was to visualize and what it was he was going to believe for. Okay, watch this. Many of you and of us, we can't see we can't really truly have faith that our marriages are going to be fixed if we can't see it. We can't really have faith that we're going to be financially debt free. Watch this, if we can't see it. We can't really have faith that we're going to be healed. Watch this, if we can't see it. So we need to have that visual perspective, that image from our image maker to see something, to begin to build expectation, which also builds faith, which also builds hope. And all of those things work together. Does that make sense? Okay. So which means that one of the things that the enemy does in attacking us is he attacks our ability to see something. He attacks, and how does he do that? If he attacks our ability to see it and we can't see it, then what happens is we can't expect it. We can't have faith for it. Okay. And how does he do that? One of the ways that he does that is through distractions. Why are distractions so popular, such a popular tactic that Satan uses? One of the reasons why is because it impacts our ability to see something. It impacts our ability to visualize something. It impacts our ability to hope. It impacts our ability to expect. Why? Because we're focused so much on something else that we can't build our faith. Why? Because we're looking at the problem and not at God. We're looking at the situation and not at God. We're looking at how bad things are and not at God and what God is doing. Does that make sense? Okay. And so if Satan can stop you from imagining, he got you. If he can stop you from hoping, he got you. If he can stop you from having faith forward, he got you. If he can stop you from expecting it, he got you. Can we go deeper? Okay. Many people try to believe God for something that they have not gotten a vision for. And again, that's what we're just talking about. We have to have that vision. Let me ask you this question. If you believe God gave you the vision for a business, what does your business look like? If you believe God gave you a vision for a better future, what does that look like? If you believe God gave you the vision to be a parent, what does it look like? Or to have your marriage fixed, what does that look like? Or to drive a better car, what does that look like? Whatever the case may be, what is your vision for it? What is your image of it? Okay. Why? Because the image that you have about yourself impacts your destiny. Okay. It impacts your destiny. Let's go to Numbers 13. I'm going to read Numbers 13, verses 1 and 2. And then we're going to skip down and look at verse 26 through 31. That's Numbers 13, 1 through 2. And then we're going to skip down through verse 26 through 31. I know that's maybe a lot of reading, but it is okay. Okay, and I just happened to have it up on my screen. Okay, so I'm going to read it. Numbers 13. I'm going to read it from the NLT. It said, and the Lord said to Moses, send out men to explore the land of Canaan, the land I am giving the Israelites. Send one leader from each of the 12 ancestral tribes. Okay, that's 1 and 2. Let's go down to verse 26. To Moses, Aaron, the whole community of Israel, Kadesh, in the wilderness of Paran, they reported to the whole community. Now, this is after the spies that came back. They reported to the whole community what they had seen and showed them the fruit that they had taken from the land. This was their report to Moses. Now, here's the power of the image. He says this: we entered the land you sent us to explore, and it was indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's the kind of fruits they produce that they produces. But the people living there, now here go the negative image. Okay, they just talked about how plenteous this land is and how awesome this land is. Now here go the negative image. But the people living there are powerful in their towns, are large and fortified. So the people are powerful. Their lands, their cities are fortified, meaning they have building, they have fences built around them that you can't get in. But the people living, and we saw giants. They're talking about big people, the descendants of Anak, which that is also Goliath. And the Amalekites lived in Negev, and the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites lived in the hill country, and the Canaanites lived along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea along the Jordan. Now here go another one, another image. But Caleb tried to quiet the people. He said, hey, be quiet. Don't listen to this negative stuff. And stood before Moses and said, let us go at once and take the land. And he said, we can certainly conquer it. Here go another image, verse 31. This is the last verse we're going to read. But the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. They said, we cannot go up against them. They are stronger than we are. And that's a powerful thing. And the powerful, when you understand the power of the imagination and the images. Watch this. None of the people, and it was like over 2.5 million people, none of them actually went into the land except for these 12. Okay. But these 12, 10 of them had one image and 2 of them had another image. The 10 said, hey, there's giants in the land. The cities are fortified. We can't take the land. We are in the people's eyes as grasshoppers. But Caleb and Joshua tried to paint a different picture. They said, hey, God already promised us that we were going to get this land. Let us go take the land. Why? Because when you compare that situation to how big God is, it's different. So in other words, what happened to them is Joshua and Caleb, they got an image of themselves through the image and through what God wanted them to see. But the people got an image, the other 10 got an image of the situation based off of the circumstance, not from God, but based off the circumstance. And here's the thing, that image, which was negative, was so powerful that it deterred over 2.5 million people from entering into their promised land. Let me ask you this question. What image do you have of yourself? How do you see yourself? What do you imagine about yourself? How blessed or how cursed do you see yourself? How smart or how dumb do you see yourself? What do you see yourself? How do you see yourself? And that's an important question, because the way that we see ourselves, watch this, determines and impacts how we relate to God. It impacts and determines how we relate to other people. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, let me go back and just reiterate what we're talking about, because remember, faith plus expectation equals miracle. Faith plus expectation equals miracle. Now, what builds your faith? Your faith is built on hope. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. All right. What builds your expectation? And that's what we deal with now. What builds your expectation is imagination. So your ability to see something is what now lends to your ability to expect it. Why? You expect what you see. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's talk about, let me give you some points and some key points to take away from this in dealing with imagination, or the images that we see about our life, and the images that we see about God, and the images that we see about our situations. Okay, here goes some images. Number one, and it's the first point, whatever image you rehearse in your mind is the image you will ultimately experience in your life. Let me say that again. Whatever image you rehearse in your mind is the image you ultimately experience in your life. Let me say that one more again, because I know you're trying to get this. Okay. Whatever image you rehearse in your mind is the image you will ultimately experience in your life. Okay. Keep that in mind. All right. You remember in Numbers chapter 4, where the children of Israel began to complain against God. And they began to murmur, right? And because they murmured and constantly complained, God told them, he says, hey, because you're constantly murmuring, I'm not going to let anyone in your generation into the promised land. Now, why is that? Why did that happen? The reason why is because even though they were faced with a crazy situation, they could not see themselves going into the promised land. They really could not visualize God using them to do something. Now, how many times has God talked to us? Let me just speak to you real quick, directly to you, no one else but you. How many times has God talked to you about doing something, about a gifting that he's given you, about a calling that he wants you to walk in, about something that he wants you to do, and you have made this statement: I can't see myself doing it. I can't see myself blessed. I can't see myself accomplishing this. And so what happens? You don't do it. Why? Because you couldn't see it. But I'm telling you, and I'm challenging you to get a bigger perspective of God and a bigger perspective of what he's telling you to do. Watch this, and get that image from God. Here's the key. God will never tell you to do something that he has not already given you the ability to do it. He will never tell you to do something that he has not already made provisions for you to do it. That's very important. Okay. So when we understand that whatever image you rehearse in your mind is the image you will ultimately experience. And so what are you rehearsing in your mind? What are you saying about yourself? Does that make sense? Why? Because what image you are counting or continue to rehearse in your mind, that's the direction your life will go in. Okay? What do you imagine about yourself? What do you see about yourself? Let me ask you another question. Let's take it a different step. What do you see about your finances? What do you see about your marriage? What do you see about your children? What are you rehearsing in your mind about that? Okay. The reason why that's important is because that works either in a positive or that works in a negative. If you consistently rehearse something negative, then guess what? Eventually your life will go towards that negative. Let me give you a story real quick. There was a pastor, a minister friend of mine, and she had this gold. When I went to the church, her church, she had this gold PT Cruiser, okay, and it had personalized plates, and the personalized plate said D's Benz, DS Benz, okay, for D's Benz. All right, now me and some of the other ministers, even the pastor, at times now. Not it seriously. This is in fun and games. Okay, we would just be in tears every Sunday. She would roll up, her and her husband, and she would roll up in his gold PT Cruiser with the personalized license plates that said D's Benz. Now, the interesting thing about it, when we asked her about it, she said, "Well, because God told me I was going to get a Benz." I said, but that's a PT Cruiser. Well, she said, I had the PT Cruiser when he told me I was going to get the Benz. So as an act of faith, I began to see myself in the Benz. So every time I got into this PT Cruiser, I always visualized that I was in a Benz. Okay. And so I told God that if he gives me a Benz, then I will give my PT Cruiser away. And I also told God, if once he gives me a Benz, that I will pick up people for church and so forth and so on. Okay. And every week for months and months and months. She came to church with this gold PT Cruiser with the word "these Benz" on it. Well, guess what she's driving today? Y'all guessed it. She's driving a gold Benz. What did she do with her PT Cruiser? She gave it away. She blessed a whole nother family with her PT Cruiser. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about it is the reason why she got that gold Benz was because she visualized it. Not only did she visualize it, she kept rehearsing it. You know, when I came to that church the first time, the pastor said, ask her what she drives. So I asked her, hey, what do you drive? She said, I drive a Benz, but it was a PT Cruiser. She started visualizing that thing. She started seeing herself in that thing. She started acting as though that thing was so. She started taking that gold PT Cruiser and getting it washed once a week and getting it detailed once a week as though she would for her Benz. What did she do? She visualized it. And so remember, the image that you see about yourself that you constantly rehearse over and over, that's the image that you will eventually go to. That you will eventually experience. Okay. Now, when you have the right picture about yourself, this is how God works and how God moves in your life. So we need to recognize truth. We understand there's some realities, some situations that we have to understand and recognize the reality of that situation so that God can fix it. Like, for example, you can't even be healed unless you understand that you are sick. We get that, okay? And I'm not necessarily talking about naming and claiming. I'm not talking about denying truth. But what I am saying is, even in the truth of your situation, see yourself and allow God to show you a better you. Allow God to show you a better situation. Allow God to give you the images, because those images are so powerful. Does that make sense? Okay. So let me say this one more thing. Allow yourself to see yourself as being victorious. So whatever's frustrating you, whatever's getting you down, whatever's impacting you, whatever things that you're struggling with, whatever things that you're dealing with, whatever things that are depressing you, guess what? God can show you something different. And watch this. And once he shows it to you, now you can expect it. Remember, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, right? What's the evidence of those things that are not seen? It is the fact that you've already seen it. You've already seen it in your mind. You've already understood it in your mind. Does that make sense? Okay. The problem that we have with imagination is this, is that most of our imaginations were killed when we were kids. They told us and they stripped us away from our ability to imagine. And so if that's you, let me just challenge you to allow God to reinstate, to give you back your imagination. Let me read another scripture for you. Romans 12:2. Romans 12:2 says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good and what is acceptable and what is perfect will of God. Okay, so here's what this verse tells us is this. It says, don't be conformed to this world, to the images of this world, to what you see in this world, to what you think, not from a godly perspective, but from a natural perspective of this world. But be transformed. How? By renewing your mind. How do you renew your mind? The only way that you can renew your mind is you have to allow your mind to see something different. To understand something different. Does that make sense? And what is that? That is your images, the things that you see about yourself. If you think you're defeated, you're going to be defeated. If you think you're a loser, you're going to be a loser. If you think that you're not going to make it out, you won't make it out. But if you allow God to show you that you can do it and you can see it, then you can expect it. Then you can have faith for it. Does that make sense? Okay, number 2. Oh man. Now y'all know normally I like to do an after party. Now what is the after party? If this is your first time, an after party is after I teach, I stay on for a few minutes and I literally allow you to ask questions. And I will answer whatever question you have. If I can answer it, I will answer that. So hopefully It's not looking good, y'all. We'll get through this, and I will allow you to ask questions. So if you have questions now, you can begin to type them in, and I'll go through the comments here in a second. And then if there is questions, I'll try to do my best to answer your questions. Okay. So the second point that we want to talk about is you have to align your imagination with what God says. Okay. In other words, don't just think about anything. Don't just allow your mind to run rampant on things that may not be true, but allow God and align what you see with God. Let me give you an example. I don't. Hopefully, you can see this. But when God had talked to me about being a pastor years ago, he had talked to me about building a church. And I was like, I don't know about nothing about building. And so he gave me this image. Let me see if I can do this. Okay. All right. Now I drew that in 2011. All right. That's the church. Now, the church, the sanctuary was also a basketball court. Kind of like when you look at the church that we have now, and where we at now, and where we worship at now, how we worship in the gym. But that the image of the church that he gave me would sit 300 to 600 people. It would have it would be a gym and a sanctuary kind of combined, that type of setup. It would have designated children's rooms, designated prayer chapel, so forth. So he gave me that image. Okay. So now right now, as I'm pastoring, right, I can begin to see what God is doing. I'm visualizing what God is doing. I can see that one day that he's going to make this a reality. Okay. Watch this. I even got phase 2. But phase 2 is a little more intricate. Okay. Let me take that down so y'all don't copyright that. Let me take that down. But why do I have that? I have that to set vision. I have that to set expectation. I have that to give me goals to work forward, to give me things to work on. I have that so that I have something that God can do and can work in my life. I have that for that reason alone. Okay. So now I just said, well, you got to align that with what God says. Well, if God is able to add 3,000 people to the church in one day, surely he can add 1 to 2 to 3 people in my church per week. He can give 5 people per week, whatever the case may be. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, if God is telling you that what you have is too small, get an image, a picture of something bigger. Okay, me and my wife, we did the same thing with our marriage. We had an image of what a marriage should look like. We had a vision, a visualization for what a marriage looked like. And we have these 2 plaques that describe what a marriage should be and what a marriage should look like. Why? Images, vision, right? So that God can use that imagination. Does that make sense? Here's the reason why I'm going to just tell you this. And that's this. Whatever God says is bigger than your reality. Whatever God says is bigger than only what you can see. Whatever God says is bigger than your fear. Whatever God says is bigger than your stereotypes. Whatever God says is bigger than any limitations that you may have or any limitations that you place on God, right? Whatever God says is bigger than any of that stuff. Does that make sense? Okay, let me give you another scripture real quick. 2 Corinthians 10, 4-5. I want to read it from the King James Version. It says this: for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Watch this. Casting down imaginations, those negative things, and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. What are strongholds? Strongholds start in the mind. Strongholds are those thoughts that hold us captive. Okay. Now watch this. Let me say it a different way. Every stronghold that you have in your life can be traced to an initial thought. And when you begin to deal with that thought and those thought patterns, you can begin to break free of those strongholds. Does that make sense? So when I'm casting down imaginations, watch this, I'm beginning to cast down and deal with those things that frustrate me. I began to deal with those things that depress me, right? Because here's the key. Everything that frustrates you and depresses you are not always things that God wants to remove from your life. Some of those things are God wants to take you through them, as I talked about Sunday. Some of those things are things that God wants you to change your perspective and your thinking about it so that he can do something greater, even bigger. Okay? Does that make sense? So let me tell you this, and then I'll take questions if there's any questions. Let me tell you this, okay? Your imagination can either bless you, or your images that you see, or they can nullify or pause prophetic words, or they can pause or nullify words that God gave you. Okay, remember the children of Israel when when God delivered them from Egypt and he told them to go, and he gave them this promised land. It was supposed to be an 11-day journey, but because they couldn't visualize it, they murmured against God. They couldn't see it. It took them 40 years to get to a place that should have only taken 11 days. And even though it took them 40 years, the generation that were adults that came out didn't even get to go in because they had lacked the ability to see it, to visualize it. And so, what I'm challenging you to do today, and what I'm challenging you on right now, is get a better vision of yourself, get a better image of yourself. Don't see yourself as weak and as low. See yourself as strong. See yourself as the head and not the tail. See yourself as financially free and not in debt. See yourself having successful marriages. See yourself being successful parents. See yourself being a successful boyfriend or girlfriend. See yourself being successful in school, being successful in your job. See yourself as being a successful individual. If you have a business, see that business as being successful. Have a great image of who you are, which that also talks about the power of choice. I may talk about that in another training, but the power of choice means this, that God gave you one of the greatest powers on earth, and that is the power of choice. And he gave you that power to choose. In other words, so that means you got to choose to be faithful. You got to choose to follow God. You got to choose some things. So why not choose to allow God to give you the images of yourself that will bless you? Okay. All right. And let me just give you this one last point, and then we'll get to the after party. Your imagination can build it before it becomes reality. And I think I showed you that picture. Okay. Now, when we build that church, that building, I want y'all to know, like he told us he was going to build it. Why? Because God told me to build it. All right. Now it's time for the after party. Let's see what we got. Do you have any questions? Let me see. If you have questions, you can ask your questions now. I think I see one question. It says, what if the image is fading due to your mind running astray because of the things that were brought to light? Ooh, that's a good question. That's a real good question. So first of all, let me just say this. Number one, it depends on the things that were brought to light. Okay. Depending on what those things are, will depend on how you proceed. For example, you may have to deal with some negative things. You have to face those and work through them so that you can reclaim that original image. Okay. Sometimes, so let me also deal with another thing. So first, let me just take it step by step. First, the thing that you imagine or the image that you have, make sure that that image is from God. Number one. Number two, if that image is from God, hold to it. Ask God to restore it back to you. Right? Begin to give you pictures of what it should look like. Okay. Now, depending on what was brought to light, you may also have to deal with those things in the process. Okay. You may have to work through those things. You may have to fix some things. Let me give you a quick example. And this may not be the things that you're talking about, but I'm just giving you as an example to see if God told you that you was going to have a Benz, so to speak, a gold Benz, and you found a gold Benz and you purchased the gold Benz, and then you found out that that gold Benz had a bad engine. All right. So then the question you have to ask is, what am I going to do? Do I get rid of the Benz? Well, if God gave it to you, then you may need to take that Benz to the shop and get it fixed. And then after it gets fixed, still drive that gold Benz because God gave it to you. Okay. Any other questions? Hopefully that answered your question. Is there any other questions? I will wait a few seconds. While I'm waiting, let me just take this time to invite you to Total Life Church. If you have not been out to worship with us or to come see us, I urge you to come out this Sunday. We start at 10 o'clock. We are at the Fairfield YMCA. We only last a little over an hour. So as I promised, if you've seen any of my advertisements, I've said that we promise you that you will get home and get out before the Baptist buffet crowd hits the buffets. So many times, depending on what you like to eat, you may even be out in enough time to still get breakfast. So are there any other questions? All right, well, I thank each and every one of you for coming. If this has blessed you and you want to donate or you want to give, I just challenge you. You can go to totallifechurch.info, and there is a give button that you can donate. All right, well, we will be here next week, same time, same channel, so to speak. And I love y'all, and we will see you next week. Talk to you later.